My name's Andy Bryant. I'm the executive director of Segal Family Foundation. We have a family office in New Jersey, but we like to think of ourselves actually as an Africa-based funder. The majority of our amazing and exemplary team and our heart and our passion lie across 4 country offices and 11 exemplary individuals in Eastern Africa. And we have the great privilege of a few of us supporting from our offices in New Jersey and New York. Let's see, rules of the road, right? And then we'll get to intros in a moment. This session couldn't be more topical and timely this week. I've watched and listened with great joy as speakers from Edgar to others have insisted on disparaging funders left and right, and I couldn't agree more. We're generally a really unaccountable bunch, and I really want to give props to Skoll Foundation, to Brittany in particular, for carving out a space. I think it's a courageous space to call into account the relative unaccountability on the part of philanthropists oftentimes, and that we need to get our act together. We've managed to find and fund and ideally positively support some exemplary nonprofits across the world, and we don't often sort of create an equitable playing field in terms of holding ourselves accountable. So I hope we provoke each other a little bit in kind and safe ways today. So I did want to point out, there's some really fraught power dynamics between donors and doers, right? In this room and just in existence, and it's not going to stop. But let's call it out, let's name it, and let's all agree that this is a safe space. So don't have your feelings hurt, but do be provocative and say what you mean and mean what you say. And I think we'll all come away a little bit smarter, and I think we'll have achieved some small measure of social justice in the process. Other rules of the road. So we called out power dynamics and said it's a safe space. What else do we want to use as guardrails? Okay.
I think I want to encourage all of you to speak with courage, and I want to acknowledge there already is an existing power dynamic in this room. Some of us are here as funders, and some of us are here as people who are looking for funding. But try to put those hats aside and really think about why we're all here today. It's because we all believe that there is some change that needs to happen in the dynamics of power and decision making along the process. So just be brave, kind of know that this is, what happens in this room is not necessarily gonna stay in this room, but I can't promise that, but it will definitely be a conversation we can all take home with us. And at the end, I hope that we all come out with a few steps that we can all take to, in our own ways, contribute to shifting this dynamic that we're about to talk about.
Right on. Sounds good. Do you have anything to add?
I would say that basing on the topic, it's important that we understand that there is a very conscious movement that's being discussed, that's being talked about, and we want to try and move that from theory to practical, which is where I like to thrive. So if we can just be as open as possible and just try and see if we can come up with, initial steps towards trying to change this narrative, I think it would be a really great session. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right, we'll do some light intros. Really want us all to sort of provide a bit of perspective on where we're coming at with this conversation, this really important conversation. I'm the lone funder on this mini panel. And I work for Segal Family Foundation based in the States, but our heart lies in Africa, East Africa, 6 countries: Burundi, Rwanda, Tanzania, Uganda, Malawi, and Kenya. Over the course of the last 8 or 9 years that I've been on the foundation's team, the proportion of our portfolio that we would define as locally led has gone from 0% to 58% as of December 31st of last year. And the trend is our friend. We're going to keep moving at a pretty steady clip each year to invest in more locally led organizations. That's simply the principal thought leader comes from the country in which they operate and seek to change the world and serve communities. We use data as our friend, and that's really rare for a funder, so I have to pat ourselves on the back. We looked at the revenue of all of our 200 plus NGO partners a couple years ago, and we found that sort of apples to apples, similar stage of maturity, similar incoming budgets, the expat-led organizations within our portfolio grew twice as fast as the African-led ones. So then we peeled back another layer and we looked at the impact proposition across those organizations, and we found that oftentimes the locally led organizations were actually outstripping the expat counterparts in terms of their level, their breadth, their depth of impact. And so then we realized that there was some kind of injustice happening, and then we peeled a few more layers back and we tried to identify the why. What we came across was a bunch of really silly, oftentimes, and foolish barriers to entry. So things like Skoll made space for a dozen of our African visionary fellows to attend the forum this year. That's amazing. Skoll's done incredible work in getting Global South rock stars here. And I'll even be so bold as to say Skoll's been courageous, because you know what? Fire Marshal says you can only have so many people attend this conference, which means that for every Global South rock star brought here by Segal, by Elma, by MasterCard, by J&J, there's someone else who gets turned away. And that's oftentimes funders. Who says no to funders? That's crazy. So real big props to Skoll Foundation for the work they're doing to get the right people in the room. That said, of the dozen incredible individuals we wanted to bring from our portfolio, our African Visionary Fellows, 3 of them didn't get visas. None of them have a criminal past. They're all actually really upstanding citizens, and yet they just couldn't get here. That is a silly barrier to entry. I talk to a lot of US-based funders, and they say things like, we only fund 501c3 organizations. And we have to be able to deliver grants in a tax-exempt manner. And then you tell them about the myriad ways, from fiscal sponsorship to equivalency determinations to all of these other routes that are really easy, low cost, and not particularly challenging, that they can do so. And oftentimes there's a eureka moment. Again, a silly barrier to entry that keeps from moving resources from A to B, the B being exemplary locally led organizations. So our work, our challenge has been not to sort of try to tackle the high-minded rhetoric of convincing other funders that funding local solutions is right and righteous, but rather trying to really demonstrate the how. What are the practical mechanisms that other funders like us, Western donors, will sort of compartmentalize, can move money towards more great locally led organizations? So that's sort of our challenge, and the challenge taken up by our team is to try to sort of win some hearts and minds and some wallets and try to move more resources toward great local actors that we think oftentimes have more sustainable, more impactful, and certainly more just solutions for the communities they serve and that they come from. So that's my background and spiel. I want to turn over an intro to Atti.
Thank you, Solomon. Andy. I did say Solomon, I'm sorry. My name is Atti. I'm the founder and CEO of Seeds of Africa, an organization that's based both in New York City, where our headquarters are, and in Ethiopia, where we do work in educating the next generation of leaders and working with their families, particularly their mothers, so they can have access to credit, access to resources, so they can make more money, which I think is really important. Women need to make more money in this world. I'm here today because I really care about locally led solutions, and I believe that they are at the core of solving the big global problems we have, because each locality has its own very specific challenges, which may be similar in the larger macro level, but when we get to the granular, smaller level, we can make a lot more deeper impact if we invest in solutions that are coming from the localities. And I really support this idea because, as the founder of Seeds, what we've learned in the last 10 years of our work is our success really lies in our ability to work with the people that we serve and to take them as our partners and come up with solutions together for the problems that they're facing, and not assume that because they don't have money or because they're poor, they don't know what they need. And I think that is a big issue in philanthropy, where we sometimes think of status and think that because I have a status, then that means I know. And it usually does come from a good place, but it ends up really impacting the whole paradigm we're all trying to shift, because the power dynamics that exist continue to be perpetuated when we're now looking at each other as partners. And I think that's all I would say for now. I'm really happy to be here. I thank the Skoll World Forum for inviting me and Solomon and Andy to come up with a really exciting agenda for all of you. And like I said earlier, I encourage all of you to be brave, to say what you mean and be open. And let's use this opportunity to learn how we can shift this challenge, because I truly believe that we will succeed better and we'll make more impact if we see each other as partners and really shift the power dynamic, not only at the program level, but at the levels of each step where the decisions on where resources go and where money go are made. I don't think we need to think like there's one area where we make the decision where the money's gonna go, and then we go to this area and we start talking about who it's gonna go with. I think we have to put where the money's gonna go in the conversations from the top all the way down, so that we can make each step of decision based on the impact we're all truly trying to make. And thank you all for being here. I look forward to an exciting session.
My name is Solomon King Benge. I'm the founder of an organization called Fundi. Our mission, quite simply, is to accelerate science learning in Africa. So we are very hyper-specific on STEM education. We use very creative ways of teaching. Our primary tool is robotics. So we teach little kids and students how to build robots, and in the process, they actually improve their performance in classrooms. They are introduced from a very early stage to careers, and they become change makers and innovators in their community. The reason that I'm very excited and very passionate about this session is because someone like me would never have had the opportunity to impact the lives of thousands of children if this power dynamic had not been addressed in some way. So over the last 3 years, we've had significant growth in both our budget and our programming, simply because there's been what I would call a narrative change from the moment that we started our work to how we are doing it right now. And part of this has been the result of Segal's deliberate investment in its partners, and many of whom are sitting here as African Visionary Fellows. And so I speak to a lot of people, including those who couldn't come to this space, because I couldn't come to this space. And I have absolutely no interest in living in the United Kingdom. It's too cold. I was telling someone that this is a paradox. It's shining, but it's cold. Like, we Africans we don't understand this. Me not being able to get a visa was a significant blow, because I've traveled to the US, I've traveled to so many places. My work is in Africa, my heart is in Africa. So Andy bringing that up was a really important reminder of why I'm here, but also the people that we leave behind. And because of the work that I do, because of how I choose to approach my work, my approach is about compassion and helping people. It's always imperative to remember that for every single one of us who's sitting in this room as a Segal grantee, there are hundreds of others who have no context for what this conversation is about. And many of them, even if they make the step to the first barrier, they're immediately seen as undereducated, under-resourced, and just a lot of issues that come up. And so seeing my organization grow because of the investment that Segal put is something that I want to try and accelerate as much as possible, because through their help, we've basically moved from an organization that's just working with a few schools. Now we're impacting thousands of children and taking a risk on local actors who have a better context. They may not have the perfect solution, but they have the best context for the work that they're doing. And giving them the space to experiment means that they are able to find creative ways of solving the problems. We do robotics. We approached our Ministry of Education and they told us robotics has no place in Africa. Right now they're talking to us and saying, can we introduce this stuff into the official government curriculum? And so when you look at this breakdown in the dynamic, someone has an idea, but they're not giving the opportunity to even test it, and then to even try and scale it, and the permission to fail and try again, it creates a significant barrier to the kind of change that we're all looking for. So I'm really excited about this, and I'm hoping that we'll have some very honest conversations, and that there's so many grantees in this room who are all looking for money, but I'm requesting you, please be as bold as you can, and let's hope that the dynamic stops here. Yeah.
So with that, so that's sort of the introductory remarks. And we might have led with this, but this is a very participatory session. Low tech, no tech, high participation. So all of you we're going to ask that you engage in a lively conversation with one another. We'll keep it limited just to sort of like these small tables. You've already self-selected who you're going to be chatting with and provoking. Atti and Solomon are going to do the heavy lifting in terms of facilitating a question set with all of you. Buy into this, This is an important conversation, and it's important that we have disagreement and air stuff out and come away with new ideas and some respect for the challenges that we're all facing, respectively. So take it away, gang.
All right. So the first thing is we will put up the questions in about a minute, but on each table, you'll see 3 different color Post-it notes. And the first order of business will be for each table to choose a facilitator amongst you. And once you choose a facilitator, we're going to ask a series of questions. There's 3 sets of questions. And for each set, there's 10 minutes. So you're going to have a conversation and write your answers. The 3 colors are, if you're a donor, pick a color. If you're a doer, pick a different color. If you don't identify as either, then you pick a different color as well. Then when you're done with answering each questions, on the walls, there are a few areas where we've put headlines, so you can go and post them on wherever they fit. So what we're going to do is, once the 30-minute of 3 sets of questions is done, each person from each table will get about 2 minutes to get up and kind of give us a consensus of what you came up with and what were the answers that came out from each of the questions. Ready?
Sounds good.
Okay, so the first question is really going through the, we can put up the, I have it here. Sorry, guys. Yeah. So the first one is really looking at what's the powering partnerships, and the questions are, what are the barriers each of you see to even finding a partner? And that's for both sides. So I encourage all of you to choose, like I said, a facilitator and kind of start digging into these questions. And we'll start walking around. We're not going to sit here the whole time, and kind of visiting with each of you and seeing how it's going. And then we'll all be back about 15 minutes before the session ends to do a closeout of kind of what comes out of each conversation. Awesome, thank you. So starting with this table, we'll take maximum 2 minutes to have your representative get up and tell us what you've learned. We're going to make it a quick round, and then we'll have about 5 minutes for the 3 of us to tell you what stood out for us from each of these Post-its. And then after this conversation, we'll be writing some kind of summary that will be distributed through the Skoll World Forum blog that will kind of give some steps on what we learned from today and what we think can be done on each side to make these partnerships stronger. So let's start with this table.
Thank you. My name is Atti with Yale University, and I'd like to present some of our findings. We covered a lot of ground, but some of the key themes that came up have to do with the power inequity in decision-making processes between grantees and funders. There's challenges in understanding the context and the environment where the work is happening, often because there's proximity issues, funders being too far removed from the work being done on the ground, and therefore having misconceptions about what the priorities should be. There was conversation around some of the difficulties and barriers for institutions trying to find funding, to figure out ways to secure that funding. So you raised some of the questions around just grant writing skills, how to put a proposal together, and the barriers that creates for very many well-positioned organizations to do the work that can be impactful in the community. We also discussed at length some of the challenges in the flow of communication between the grantees and the funders. Are there mechanisms for the funders to have on-the-ground experience, site visits? If site visits are not possible, are there mechanisms to use virtual technology and other ways, check-ins, to understand the dynamics on the ground? There's also questions about criteria and reporting requirements. We have instances where organizations feel like all they do, their mission turns from an impact organization on the ground to a reporting organization, and that's not a dynamic that is helpful. So organizations sometimes have to reject funding because of onerous reporting requirements. So there was a great interest in building trust, building relationships, and figuring out pathways for greater interactions that's meaningful, deep, and impactful.
Thank you. Thank you, Atti. Go to next table.
We're all trying to avoid it. We were a bit unruly. So I'm not sure that we had one perfect thing. I think starting the conversation with kindness and then continuing the conversation through that with kindness was like a key starting point for us, and open-mindedness. And actually, back to what you guys were saying on the reporting requirements, I think that we were just trying to look at alternative ways of reporting, so that reporting comes from the organisation themselves and what they're looking to measure for themselves, and that then the donors kind of use that as their requirement. Unruly team, anything else to add?
I think the other thing which was very interesting was the idea of feedback, that when a donor, let's say, says no or is not ready for funding at that point, should also give feedback to the organization as in to why they're not supporting at that particular point. But also doers should also be open to feedback and criticism, and to be able to learn to establish long-term relationships with their donors, even though they're not giving them money, but perhaps they can give them other forms of support beyond just money.
Thank you. If you can go to the next table.
Okay. So adding to many of the points that the other table made, we do believe that one of the issues is that, particularly for investors, right, the due diligence process and the barriers that they put, right, for access are sometimes too high. And it's like a blanket approach, and there's no understanding of the local situation. That really creates a barrier and creates a market for intermediaries, right? That multiplies the transaction costs of getting that money there so much that it becomes unviable. And so there is not necessarily an appetite for taking some risk and lowering a little bit those barriers. And at the same time, from a doer's perspective, right, the limited ability to communicate in a developed world language, right? The idea, their budgeting, their business plans, their business models, right, create a barrier. It can be spectacular, but if you are not articulate, right, people tend to shut down. So it's like we need a two-pronged approach, like increase the ability to communicate from the doers and really decrease the, whatever extent is possible, right, the funders and investors' expectations or on what the due diligence is in the field.
Thank you.
We touched on a number of those things, a few things that maybe haven't been mentioned as in the way that we talked about them. We talked about the reliance on gatekeepers, and that's one of the ways that funders find the doers, but that can inherently promote power imbalances that funders aren't aware of on the ground, especially in specific situations, conflict situations, for instance. Talking about trying to expand definitions of success to create a more inclusive pipeline, and the work that we have to do internally on both sides, assumptions from the doers as to what funders want and want to hear, and then funders expanding an understanding of what is needed and how success can be measured. And I think it all revolves around managing risk by building trust. So how do we build that into our systems and invite more people into the process? There's some frustration about, invite-only grants. How do we even create simply a mechanism that you can at least get in front of someone if you're on the other side of the world? So, thank you.
Hi, I think we've also had very similar discussions to what's already been mentioned, but I think one of the main themes that came up in our discussion was the need to have, to create and to maintain open channels of communication, going both ways from the donors and from the doers, so that people can express what's happening in real time versus having to wait for the report to be done for then address the issue, and you may even lose, risk losing the support from the donor. So how can you reach out to your donor before it's too late? And that goes back to having trust, and how do you build that trust between the donor and the doer so that you can continue to do your work, and how do you build into that the flexibility to adopt a plan B when things are not going well while you're still trying to do the work and not after it's too late. Some of the other issues that came up was from the donor side, the lack of information on how to find the right partners, because you run into biases of only working with the people that you know before that somebody else referred you to. So how do you go beyond that? And not underestimating some of the challenges of logistics, time, money, and travel time to get to different places, or technology challenges that you have when you're working with people in different areas from where you are. And then also, how do you address some of the biases that you have with you as a donor and as a doer, in trying to find the right partners for your job? Anything else? No?
We also had similar discussions to the other tables, but one of the things that stood out is that donors tend to not be willing to give the doers permission to fail, the permission to also change when something is not working. What also stood out though was that the doers tend to not meet the funders or the donors, not where they're at, but not even in the middle, but meeting them somewhere. And that came out when we were talking about feedback mechanisms, in that if you only have to report once a year, it doesn't mean you don't need to have constant engagement with the donor in trying not just to give feedback on your programs, but also trying to build a relationship with them so that they also have a human-centric approach instead of just being numbers-driven. So I think that was our big take-home, was that the doers and the donors need to meet somewhere. It might not be halfway, but they do need to meet somewhere.
Thank you very much. A lot has been said that we also looked into, but one other thing that we could add from the side of the donor, it's also from the very beginning of the interactions or the partnership, really clearly defining terminologies such as impact. What is impact in your own understanding as the funder, versus what I understand as the doer, what impact is. So those terms being addressed at the very, very first interactions are important going forward. And I think also, as the doer, at the same time, provide as much information of what you are intending to do to the donor at the very first interactions, so that later, as I report, it's not surprising, oh, you did that, I didn't know you were going to do that. But also giving as much information is key. But we also looked into the policy makers, and in that we look into the government. What's the government role to facilitate this partnership between the doer and the donor, if the doer is not actually the government in terms of partnership with the funding agency? Setting standards that will also make the government feel uncomfortable that there was money in this country, and ABCD organizations are actually benefiting from that, so that it fits into what the government plans are.
Thank you very much. I want to take a couple of minutes to kind of share some of the posters that stood out to me as I was walking around. And then I think we can all do that after. From the donor side, I saw implicit bias, lack of empathy, the idea of winners take all, and those were the three that really stood out to me. From the doer side, context. I read a few places where donors are really obsessed with scale, and that can become sometimes a challenge. And unrealistic expectations, particularly when it comes to budgeting, was another one that really stood out to me. Yeah, so I don't know what you would want to add to that.
So the one that I'd forgotten where I read it, because it was like all over the place, but it came up in a conversation earlier as well, was the idea of donor silos. And this is basically the understanding that donors have their own networks, and getting into that network is really hard. And yet they all keep sort of referring to each other to ask if you're funding this person. But the minute you get it, it's a huge catalyst. But the challenge is for someone who's on the outside looking in, how do you then, enter that circle to enjoy the benefits? And I think it's an interesting addition to this conversation. It's an interesting result of conversations like this. Yeah.
So I was at a donor silo on Sunday, a meeting of a bunch of funders that I really respect. And our team led a session, basically the same thing, we're just beating this drum at every turn. Led a session on sort of like the what and the how of potentially funding more locally led organizations. And similar to this one, we kind of tried to skip past the sort of ideological impetus for it, the justice aspect, and get to just here's some practical tips. Even still, trying to focus on sort of plain talk mechanisms, a funder who I really respect and who I consider a gatekeeper, a signaler for a lot of other funders, approached me afterwards and said, you know what? That really felt like virtue signaling. Like, if I don't have locals on the masthead of my theory of change, then I'm a bad funder, a bad person. And when I hear about like lack of empathy and implicit bias, these are charged and serious charges and terms that we're throwing around. So I would like to walk that back a little bit and just say, for me, the really compelling argument is just one of math. I want the largest pool of radical thinkers and change makers I can, and I want to place as many bets on different people approaching big, thorny problems as possible. There's an equity argument that I think we all hold dear, and it's an important one, but I think we need to move past that and try to come up with the practical reasonings for some of this. And for us, it's math. We want more solutions to these same problems. And the world's challenges are big enough for all. We don't need to have monopolies on sort of solutions, right? And I really like that comment from the young lady in the back around sort of criteria not matching what you're looking for. And that, I've seen that a lot, and I've seen it in our own house, our own shop, where we had the tail wagging the dog. We said, well, look, you just don't qualify for our criteria. We want to fund people like you. But it's like, wait a minute. Then fix your criteria. That's a simple hack. So anyways, just like really try to take a look at your own systems. And I think as a funder, if you come away from these types of conversations feeling a little defensive, do what I do, which is get really grumpy, go through the stages of grief for about 24 hours, and then try to reflect in a more sober moment on how you can do something about it, and whether there was substance to that sort of allegation or charge or not. I thought this was wonderful. I mean, we spent like 8 or 9 years getting some things right in our head and trying to make our world reflect those learnings. You all, in the course of like 90 minutes, put your big brains together and came up with most everything we figured out over 8 years. So kudos. That's kind of what we figured would happen when we sort of devolved the conversation and power to these small groups. I really appreciate everyone being game enough to participate. Thursday afternoon can be rough in this marathon of a week. So rah, good job, team. I want to encourage one last thing. Shameless plug. Tomorrow, our team, Segal Family Foundation, will have an office hours from 10 to noon over at the Jam Factory. If anyone wants to geek out on local solutions, especially like practical mechanisms for getting stuff done and moving needed resources from exemplary funders to exemplary doers, we're there to geek out with you all. But thank you so much.
Before you wrap up, a couple of things. One is I really want to say that empowering people through philanthropy is all about sharing power. So as all of you leave this room, think about where in your decision making can you share that power, and who can you share that power with? If you're a donor in this room, you probably have grantees that are exemplary people and have a lot of talent. So the next time you're looking at setting a criteria on what to fund or where, speak to them and ask them, what their thoughts are, and not only for what they're being funded on, but what they think you could be working on. As they're your partners on the ground, they know a lot better about what you're looking for more than maybe another funder that you talk to, because they're actually on the space doing the work. And the other thing is kind of putting this back to the whole theme of this week, accelerating possibility. I really want all of you to think about who decides what possibility is and who makes that choice, who sets the agenda, and kind of try to sit with that and think about how that can help you make the next funding decision or the next visit on the ground that you're going to make. I want to say thank you for being open. It's a really lovely conversation and one that's really charged, and look forward to publishing something on the Skoll World Forum blog, and we'll make sure that everybody gets it. So thank you again. And I don't know if Solomon, you have something you would like
so I live my life by one mantra: less talk, more action. And just earlier today, Andy was telling me that I'm very silent. I'm like, yeah, I'm ready for the session. I don't, so I really hope that our takeaway from this session is that we are going to act more and talk less. And hopefully that action will move the needle again towards more equitable support for the people who truly deserve the work, who truly deserve the money that you're giving. Yeah.
Right on, man. Thank you, everyone. Good job.